Hi, it's the show with Ron. I'm Ron, and we're here for some big news headlines, adding context and commentary so we can understand, maybe not get so wrapped up in things, understand what's really behind it. And we've got a big thing happening. Things will come to pass. We've heard a lot about how crazy Donald Trump is, how senile Biden is occasionally, and then other times he seems okay. But these things are going to come to pass. We're going to see both of these guys live and unfiltered in a debate. And a lot of things can happen in a U.S. debate. There's so many, I've said this many times, these are both very unusually, uncommonly unsuitable candidates. I mean, the Democrats say Donald Trump is a terrible danger, an unprecedented danger, although we have seen him as president for 4 years, and the country didn't fall to pieces, and he accomplished a few things like that he wanted to, such as getting the abortion Roe v. Wade overturned, but other things we see how the uh, the the bureaucracy, the state of the United States continues on, even with Donald Trump there. And, it shows that a lot of the direness in the media about how there's going to be unprecedented disaster. Well, we've already seen him as president, and we've kind of got an idea of what it's like. Even if there are, this is my opinion, even if there are grand designs to destroy democracy, the reality has shown that the system has been very resilient to that. I mean, they've even got Donald Trump on all these charges and felony charges. It just happened to come to pass right before the election season. And probably the greatest thing that one would think that warnings of Donald Trump as being a terror that has to be defeated is that the person that they put up against him is Joe Biden, who has been shown many times, again and again, through many clips that we all watch, as being quite slow in his speech, maybe a little senile, maybe a little too old. So if it is so important for Donald Trump to be defeated, why is Biden the person that is put up against him? So we're going to have a situation where each side is hoping that the other side is shown up for their worst qualities. You know, the Trump side is hoping that Biden is going to come off as slow and senile, and the Biden side hopes that Trump is going to come off as unhinged. And in both cases, in past debates, one that just pops into my mind, we had Reagan and Carter in 1980, and the Democrats then as now did have a lot of voices in the media that continually explained that Ronald Reagan was unhinged and everything he said was crazy. But when they had the debates, when people heard him, he sounded quite reasonable. And this is a sort of syndrome that can repeat itself in these debates coming up. So sometimes when you hear a whole speech by Donald Trump, even whether you agree with it or not, it sounds a little bit reasonable, even if you think that what he's talking about is racist and terrible or whatever. The way he expresses himself does not sound like a raving lunatic in the way the media always tells us that Donald Trump is always speaking like a raving lunatic. So if Donald Trump puts in a normal performance and puts forth his what he wants to say in a reasonable way, that could mute the idea that finally we're going to see what the media has told us that Donald Trump is crazy all the time. Same thing holds true for Biden. If Biden comes through with a great performance like he did in the State of the Union address, I don't know if what they do. Do you give him shots of B12 vitamins, whatever? Sometimes Biden is all together and speaks in a quicker cadence. Sometimes he speaks so slow you kind of get worried for him. If he puts in a good performance, that may mute the idea that Biden is too elderly, senile, slow to be president. But the overall question, I don't think many people talk about this, and I have. Maybe a little bit. James Carville a couple of weeks ago criticizing the Biden administration for focusing on paying off the debts of super rich people who go to expensive universities as a big Democratic initiative, as opposed to trying to attract the middle ground. And this is what I'm talking about. What I've talked about, very few people talk about in the media. In the media, it's all about extremism on both sides. But traditionally in U.S. politics, you want to capture the middle ground. You want to capture the center. And it's very unlikely that anybody who's a diehard Trump supporter at this point is going to suddenly say, "Well, Biden is not senile as we thought, so why not vote for him?" And the opposite way around. If you can imagine any Biden supporters, any Democrats who are firmly attached to Biden and say that Trump is insane, and often when you say, a lot of people who say Trump's insane and a danger, they also have to say that Biden is the greatest thing. So for me, I think that Trump says a lot of insane things, but that doesn't mean I think Biden is great. I recognize both the deficits on both sides of the candidates here. So we have a situation where probably the people who love Biden are not going to vote for Trump no matter what he says, or vice versa. So again, we're back to the constant of American political life for many decades now, capturing the middle. We've talked about before how someone like Bill Clinton was seen as a very moderate, middle of the road person who captured the center. They identified this demographic of soccer moms who were maybe upper class people who would have voted for Republicans, were a key demographic in a lot of states, but realized with some kind of moderate policies by Bill Clinton, they could be attracted over for the kinder, gentler Clinton. And of course, George H.W. Bush, the first Bush, used this kinder, gentler motto in his politics to show he wasn't like a too hard line Republican. He wanted to do things for the poor and the social issues, this sort of a thing. So my question in these debates are, how do they capture, how do they moderate, how do they show that they are not too far to one side or another and capture the middle? Certainly Trump's policies have been shown in the last 3 or 4 years to become more mainstream. At the beginning of the Biden administration, they had like open borders and defund the police. All that's gone now. Now Biden's trying to show he's almost as tough as Trump on immigration. He's had to do that. And of course, Trump has also kind of flipped the script on American interventionism abroad. America has over 100 bases overseas. We run the world, we control everything, and we have for decades, and that's been part of the Republican internationalist ideal. The Republicans were behind the free trade initiatives. Clinton took that up as a moderate politician, brought all that to pass in the 90s. Well, Clinton's flipped all that. Now there's a growing sense in the center of the electorate that all this free trade might have been good to a point, but sent way too many jobs overseas to countries that hate us and those jobs and any growth of the middle class in a country like China has not empowered more freedom there. It's just allowed the Communist Party to crack down even more than they had already. So let me hold on. I got to. Sorry, had a call there. So we have Biden and Trump both redefining a new middle ground of politics outside of the traditional way Republicans used to be before Trump, and Democrats had sort of come on board with a lot of the Republican ideals about internationalism and the free trade agreements and this sort of thing. And it's left Biden in a very tricky situation. And, it's kind of an example of when you're in a situation where times change, where the American public seems less interested in, paying for or fighting foreign wars than they ever have been. Suddenly, Biden is on the back foot in dealing with issues in Russia and Ukraine and in Israel and Hamas. Those wars and those situations where normally the U.S. would be right in there. And after all, the press, the liberal, the Democratic-leaning press, spent a lot of time in the early 2000s trying to educate the public about how bad war was and how George W. Bush was a war criminal for starting and paying for these foreign wars. And this ideal went on. I think a lot of Republicans sort of came around to that viewpoint, and here we have the end point of that. And the adversaries of America see that as well. So you have countries like China saying, "Hey, now might be the great time to invade Taiwan, to make its move in the South China Seas," because the U.S. public just really isn't interested in fighting these foreign wars anymore. And we see the breakdown of the international order. And a lot of that, to be fair, happened during the Biden administration, where there was a sense that there was a weakness, and probably also an economic weakness, with the U.S. budget deficit out of control, the national debt out of control. So stay tuned for the June 27th debate, and we'll see where things land. This is an unusual situation in U.S. politics, and one of those points they talk about of inflection, where the old ways of the parties in the last 40, 50, 60 years are all being reshuffled around. Really because of Donald Trump. Donald Trump and a lot of his policies, these are neocon policies, neoconservative policies. They come out of a lot of the liberal press and the unpopular and unsuccessful wars in Iraq and Afghanistan that the Republican president George W. Bush ran in the early 2000s. Then the liberal media came in, tried to encourage people to say that all these wars are bad. And eventually what happened, they flipped the Republican Party back to its older isolationist pre-World War II roots. And that's Donald Trump. So something that I notice here, I grew up in very small towns in the U.S. Let's just jump to another subject. And when I was a kid, all we had was Burger Chef, and McDonald's, something like that. There were no restaurants, sit-down restaurants in these small towns. By the 1990s, a lot of venture capitalists had dumped in hundreds of millions of dollars, if not more. And now all little towns have their Applebee's and sit-down restaurants, and those are all going by the wayside. After COVID, all these places were closed, and they never came back, and people are back to eating just some fast food garbage. If you walk around these small towns that I live in and have lived in, you'll see the size of the people. They're huge. They're gigantic. They're not like they were in the 70s. You look at your home movies in the 70s, the early 80s, everybody's nice and skinny. Now the average person walking around the U.S. is gigantic. I don't know what the point of that is. It's just things do change. And I know a lot of people, when I bring up that subject, say, oh, no, no, everybody was always fat. Nope. So here we have another, this is an interesting point. So we have a situation where the Iranian president is essentially attempting to, create the imperial presidency and hand down the job down to his son, talking about a lot of details here about the Iranian military might not like that, overthrow him. Iran is at best a nominal kind of democracy that is really controlled by religious cliques that'll allow certain people to run and not run. Where that falls as a real democracy, you have to decide for yourself. But it ends up being controlled. We also have even within the military, we have the Revolutionary Guard that gathers together a lot of business and money control, and a lot of smaller countries that look weird and chaotic have something like this. You have a part of the military that's not just about military; it's about business, and they as I say, they gather an inordinate amount of resources and money to themselves, and then they use that to control the state. So the one point I wanted to make about this is, Israel has long been very embedded in Iranian life. Money goes a long way, and they control a lot of people within Iran, and certainly Israel is going to want to make a change, or make sure the change that's made in Iran is going to benefit them, because Iran has been the puppet master between all the stuff that's happened with Hamas in the West Bank and the hostage taking, and in Yemen in the Red Sea with the Houthis trying to disrupt shipping there, and in southern Lebanon with Hezbollah, who is threatening Israel. So on all sides, Israel finds itself threatened and surrounded. And I'll just mention the one. Again, I don't think many people bring this up, but this is my feeling, my theory. I think a lot of people in the West, a lot of people that support Israel. See, okay, if you remember what happened before there was this war in Gaza Strip between Hamas, all that hostage taking, the whole world had opposed for several years the Netanyahu government that was trying to muck around with the way their Supreme Court justices could rule on stuff the government did. So that was another kind of right-wing government that they had to get rid of. So I think a lot of people now are watching the situation, and they'd like the Netanyahu government to go way too far in destroying its enemies, to the effect that it discredits itself. And they get rid of that government that the West was pretty much opposed to anyway, a lot of the liberal side of the West, because of the way they were trying to change the balance of powers in the Israeli government. Remember, there were like huge demonstrations of people marching against the government. So this is the other aspect of it, that maybe for some people the ideal thing would be to wipe out Hamas in Gaza, and at the same time discredit and then have the Netanyahu government fall, and then have a more moderate government come in there. So that kills a lot of birds with one stone. Okay, I wanted to talk. I got to apologize a little bit because I've just traveled around the world. I'm doing a little book tour for my books in the U.S. I'll talk about that in a moment. And boy, I went to the opposite side of the world, and that is just the most extreme jet lag. It's a psychological thing. Your mind just feels like there's something wrong. something's not right mentally, and that lasts for like a week. It's awful. So speaking of something else, it would be awful if I were a kid, but now as I'm an adult, I can breathe easy about it. We got this mandatory military service. Conscription, or in the United States, as we referred to it as the draft. And when I was growing up, I remember being scared to death of the draft, being in the military. I heard the stories from my father and other people about, I don't know, having to run around and sleep in the mud and the ice. And I don't know. When I was a kid, that all sounded like a terrible, terrible thing. But when I grew up, I thought, oh, that was kind of fun and camaraderie, and I just interpreted it a certain way because I heard these stories as a kid. But as we see happening around the world, they're talking about it in Europe. These countries like Germany, who refuse to spend on their own defense, insist the United States and their soldiers in their country defend them against Russia. Well, with Trump on the horizon and Biden having to, mimic a lot of Trump policies, there's more pressure on these countries to up their military spending and try to take care of themselves, not depend on the U.S. taxpayer. Like, have you ever met a European person who mocked and laughed at you because the poor Americans, we don't have free socialized health care. We don't get to, some of these European countries, they get to retire at very young ages. We don't. Oh, boo-hoo, America's so backwards. The reason is we spend all our money, and we're $34 trillion in debt, defending a lot of countries that won't even spend 2% of their GDP on defense, like a lot of these European countries. That's why there's a pushback. And that's why Trump had said, oh, if they don't raise their military spending, they're going to let Russia do whatever they want to these countries. Of course, it's an offhanded and a stupid and flippant comment to make, which Trump often does. But of course, the media allows it to be taken out of context and saying Trump's going to pull us out of NATO, it's not really what he's saying. However, a lot of countries looking about mandatory military service again. Can you imagine in the United States with all the coddled brats that we have and all of the helicopter parenting and the wimpiness that seems apparent for so many people? Could you imagine putting these young people into the military? It might be good for them. I don't know. Again, see, this is, no matter what you think of it, this is the failure of the West. The West failed in securing the peace after the end of the Cold War, allowing Russia to, again, as they always have, threaten other nations around them, threaten the West. We didn't get rid of nuclear bombs, so here we have this situation again. Maybe it's like what happened in World War II. We had World War I, the war to end all wars, the worst war ever, incredible devastation, mass killings, and just unimaginable cruelty and misery. And then, in less than a generation, we were all at it again. And I know there's some documentary out there where it's showing people, the veterans of World War I, just in tears, saying, how did you let this happen again? And you even had a bigger war. So we have a situation now where we may have to go back to conscription. I wonder if maybe Trump, neocon, maybe he gets in and they have to do this, or even if, say, even Biden gets in again as president and has to have conscription to address these issues in foreign countries. Maybe that could trigger a civil war. Maybe that could trigger people resisting the state of the affairs of the nation. And lastly, I wanted to mention this. You saw this about Apple, and I'm super skeptical and make fun of AI, or as we call it, slop. Somebody else on the internet coined that. It's good enough for me. And is this really all that AI boils down to? Some sort of, oh, you can conjure up a bunch of text and make your own custom emojis and custom photos. These companies, Google, Apple, Facebook, they're sure put a lot of money into this AI to just have it be, generate your own little icons or emoticons in the in your phone. Is this all that it can be? I wonder where all this is going to pan out. And, we're seeing, we have this technology curve where you start out with everyone saying new technology is going to change the world. And then the shine goes off of it when they realize what it really does. And eventually it comes to some equilibrium. But what they can really do with AI on a consumer level like this, what it really turns out they can do with it, and whether that's interesting enough, whether people will say, okay, I'll start buying a new iPhone again every year like I used to when they first came out and there were new features. Whether that happens or not, I don't know. I wonder if just being able to generate your own custom pictures or have it type up some kind of generic bedtime story for your kid, is this worth the hundreds of billions of dollars that they're buying up all this AI tech? I don't know. I doubt it. I doubt a lot of things. I'm here doing my little book tour for books. This is my novel. This is a novel of young people making their way in the world, feeling disillusioned with the way things are, with life, with love, with the promises that our nations, that our culture has given us, disillusionment with the world the way it is, and thus you travel on to the furthest places to find yourself or lose yourself. And also, my previous book, this is a sort of memoir short story collection where I try to apply the discipline of the short story to memoirs about some of the things I did and lived in the 1990s in Asia. Some very exotic and unusual stories you won't find anywhere else. You can't imagine. Those are my books. It's on Amazon Kindle and bookstores in Thailand, some in the US. Stay tuned. We got lots of interesting politics. And I think just going through this process of looking at the news, adding context and commentary, trying to talk about it, it might make us a little less excited, agitated. So many people want us to join their cause. Now we even have civil war on the horizon. We don't want that. Don't march in somebody else's parade. Don't go down fighting somebody else's battle. Let's get together and let's try to understand the news, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.